Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. No one in Port Charles could have predicted that a spark would ignite in a place, and between two people, where romance seemed impossible. The early morning haze over General Hospital set the tone for another day of chaos, healing and unexpected run-ins. But this day would quietly shift the course of two lives. As the elevators chimed and staff rushed through the corridors, the emotion that would blossom had already begun its very first flicker, invisible to everyone involved. A patient chart dropped onto the nurse's station, a cup of coffee wobbled, a doctor brushed past a visitor, and somewhere between these ordinary moments, an extraordinary connection formed before either heart even understood what it felt. It started when Christina Corinthos Davis, exhausted after another sleepless night worrying about her father's unraveling mental health and the unpredictable fallout surrounding his bipolar disorder, walked into the hospital with no intention of getting involved in anything other than checking on a friend. She moved briskly down the hallway, rubbing her temples. But just as she turned the corner near the lab, she collided with someone she had never seen before, sending his stack of files scattering across the hallway. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Christina said, dropping to her knees to help gather the papers. The man crouched too, his soft voice answering, "It's okay. Really. I should have been paying attention." When their eyes met for the first time, both froze for half a second too long. A small jolt of something, not quite recognition, not quite surprise, ran right through them. The man introduced himself as Dr. Micah Ramsey, the new trauma fellow hired through Mercy's partnership program with GH. Tall, calm, with an easy, sincere smile that seemed out of place in a world as chaotic as Port Charles, he gave off a presence that immediately softened Christina's racing thoughts. She blinked twice, trying to shake off the oddly warm flutter in her chest. "You're new," she said, stacking the files neatly before handing them to him. "Yeah," he replied, brushing dust from the top folder. "First week. And already making stellar impressions by dropping things everywhere." Christina laughed softly. Too softly, she realized, and cleared her throat. "Welcome to General Hospital. Collisions are basically part of the orientation." What neither of them noticed was Molly, who stood at the end of the hallway, raising an eyebrow with quiet suspicion. She had come to ask Christina about a family scheduling issue, but what she saw instead was her sister blushing. Actually blushing. Molly's expression tightened. She just healed the tension between them after months of emotional landmines. And the last thing she needed was Christina diving headfirst into another complicated situation. But Molly didn't approach. Not yet. She stepped back as Christina continued speaking with the newcomer. Dr. Ramsey explained that he'd come from a larger trauma unit in Chicago, hoping for a slower pace and fewer emotional casualties. "You came to Port Charles for a slower pace?" Christina asked with an incredulous grin. "You'll learn fast. You picked the wrong city for that." He chuckled, tucking his pen behind his ear. "So I've been told." Another long, quiet beat fell between them, and neither seemed eager to walk away. Finally, he broke the silence. "Is your head okay? You hit me pretty hard with that corner turn." "I didn't hit you that hard," she said, nudging him lightly with her elbow. "But yeah, I'm good." She hesitated. "Actually better now." Micah's smile softened. "Same." When they reluctantly separated, Christina heading toward the nurse's station and Micah toward the ER, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She placed her hand over her chest for a moment, as if steadying the unexpected flutter within it. "You just met him," she whispered to herself. "Get a grip." But her pulse didn't listen. Later in the afternoon, Christina visited Alexis, who was reviewing case notes for a client. Alexis didn't look up at first when her daughter entered. "If you came to warn me about another potential crisis with Sonny, save it," Alexis muttered, flipping pages. "I'm already bracing myself." Christina sat down, still distracted, twirling a pen between her fingers. "It's not about Dad," she said. "Well, not exactly." Alexis finally looked at her. "You're flushed. What happened?" Christina waved her off. "Nothing. I ran into someone. Literally." Alexis narrowed her eyes. "Someone. Interesting?" Christina paused too long again. "He's a doctor. New here. And I don't know. We talked. Alexis straightened. You like him? Mom, Christina groaned. I didn't say that. Alexis folded her arms. You didn't have to. Meanwhile, in the ER, Micah replayed the moment with Christina as he sanitized his hands at the sink. His colleague, Dr. Portia Robinson, walked in behind him, noticing the hint of distraction on his face. You look like someone who forgot their anniversary, she said lightly. He smirked. Nothing that dramatic. Just met someone today. Portia's eyebrows lifted. Already? This place works fast. He dried his hands, leaning against the counter. It wasn't planned. We just bumped into each other. But it felt like. He stopped, searching for the right word. Portia crossed her arms with interest. Like what? Micah finally said quietly. Like something I wasn't expecting. That evening, the hospital cafeteria was nearly empty when Christina stopped in for a drink. She rounded the corner to the beverage station and froze. Micah was already there. He turned at the sound of her soft gasp. Hey, he said gently. We meet again. Christina let out an awkward laugh. Guess the universe has us on the same shift rotation. Or maybe, he said, lifting an eyebrow, it just wants us to talk again. She held his gaze longer than she intended. Maybe. As they stood together in the warm fluorescent glow of the cafeteria, the outside world fell away. Every chaotic part of their day, the stress, the tension, the uncertainty, seemed to fade in the presence of this strange, unexpected calm. They chatted about small things at first. The hospital food, his impression of Port Charles, her volunteer work at the youth center, his past in emergency trauma. It's hard to turn your brain off after seeing so many people come close to losing everything, he admitted. Christina nodded softly. Yeah, life can change in a blink. He looked at her, eyes steady. Or start in one. She swallowed. Hard. Their conversation deepened effortlessly, like they had known each other far longer than a few scattered hours. The kind of ease that felt dangerous because it made everything too real too quickly. When Micah finally checked his watch, he sighed. I should get back. Yeah, she replied. Me too. But neither moved. Slowly, he reached for his cup, brushing the back of her hand with his fingertips. The warm electric jolt shot through both of them. He pulled back instantly. Sorry. That was... No, Christina whispered. It's okay. They shared a quiet stare that lingered on the edge of something neither dared define. When Christina returned home later, Molly was waiting on the sofa with her arms crossed. So, Molly began, are you going to tell me why you were talking to Dr. Tall and Handsome earlier? Christina rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh my God, Molly. I bumped into him. Relax. Molly pressed. You were glowing. I don't glow, Christina insisted, dropping onto the couch. I'm a Corinthos. We brood. Molly cracked a reluctant smile but didn't drop it. Just be careful, okay? Things get complicated fast in this family. Christina softened. I'm not diving into anything. I just met someone. And it felt different. Molly's expression gentled. Different can be good. Across town, Micah sat in his small temporary apartment, replaying every moment with Christina, wondering why a stranger felt like someone he had been waiting to meet without knowing it. He leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. What are you doing? He muttered to himself. This is not the plan. But the tiny smile that crept over his face gave him away. The plan had already changed. The next morning brought more signs that whatever existed between them wasn't just coincidence. Christina showed up at GH with pamphlets for the youth center's upcoming charity event, and Micah passed by just as she was delivering them to the volunteer desk. Good morning, he said softly, unable to hide the instant warmth in his voice. Christina felt her cheeks flush again. Hey, you look tired. Long night, he admitted. But seeing you helps. Before she could respond, Sonny unexpectedly approached from behind, his expression unreadable. Christina, he said, his tone heavy. We need to talk. She stiffened instantly, her stomach knotting with that familiar worry. Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Sonny's eyes flicked to Micah. I can see that. Micah stepped back politely. I'll let you two talk. But Sonny's gaze lingered on him a beat too long, already measuring, already uneasy. As soon as Micah left, Sonny said, You okay? Christina answered quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. Sonny narrowed his gaze. Who is he? Dad, she groaned. Please don't start. Sonny softened slightly. I'm not starting anything. I just want you to be careful. Christina nodded, but her thoughts were already drifting toward Micah. By afternoon, Micah found himself searching for reasons, any reasons, to pass by the nurse's station. He nearly collided with Trina, who noticed his distraction immediately. You're looking for someone, she teased. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. Just checking on a chart. Trina smirked knowingly. Right. When he finally spotted Christina again, she was laughing gently with a patient's family member. The moment she noticed him, her laughter softened into a smile just for him. He approached slowly. You free for a minute? She nodded. Yeah. They walked toward the solarium, the quietest space in the hospital. Sunlight poured through the windows as they stood facing one another, both unsure how to begin. Micah finally spoke. I know this is quick and unexpected, and maybe not something either of us planned. Christina stepped closer. Yeah, but it feels right. He exhaled shakily. I haven't felt this way this instantly with anyone. Christina swallowed. Me either. Silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, hopeful, heavy with possibility. Micah reached for her hand again, but this time he didn't pull away. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and sure. Christina let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding as she leaned in just slightly. Chris, he whispered. Micah. The moment between them grew tighter, deeper, impossibly tender, until a voice called from the doorway. Christina. They jumped apart, startled. It was TJ holding a chart, eyebrows raised in confusion. Christina cleared her throat quickly. We were just, talking. TJ nodded slowly, suspicion in his eyes but no judgment. Right. Well, carry on. Micah looked at her with an apologetic smile. She whispered back. That was almost embarrassing. Almost, he said softly. But worth it. As TJ walked away, Christina turned back to Micah. This isn't going to be easy. My family is complicated. Micah smiled gently. So is mine. She took another step forward. So what now? He squeezed her hand again. Whatever this is, I want to see where it goes. If you do. Christina's breath trembled slightly. I do. And in that sunlit corner of General Hospital, where heartbreak, miracles, and chaos lived side by side, something rare happened. Something unexpected. Something instant. Something real. Love at first sight blossomed quietly. And poor Charles had absolutely no idea what was coming next. The sprawling, sun-drenched complex of the Port Charles Athletic Club was a cathedral of routine. The air, thick with the scent of chlorine from the Olympic-sized pool and the faint metallic tang of sweat from the weight rooms, was a familiar constant. For Elizabeth Weber, it was a sanctuary of sorts, a place to lose herself in the rhythmic slap of her sneakers on the treadmill, a temporary escape from the intricate, often heartbreaking tapestry of her life. Her world had been a series of devastating losses and quiet betrayals, a landscape painted in shades of grief and resilient hope. She was a woman who had learned to build her walls high and fortify them strong, her heart a carefully guarded citadel. Love, in her experience, was not a lightning strike but a slow, cautious burn, and even then it often sputtered out, leaving only the cold ashes of disappointment. On the other side of the city, in the sterile, imposing corridors of General Hospital, Dr. Hamilton Finn was battling his own demons in the relentless glare of fluorescent lighting. His routine was one of penance and purpose, a daily attempt to outrun the ghosts of his past. A brilliant diagnostician with a soul haunted by addiction, and the tragic loss of a daughter he never got to know, Finn had resigned himself to a life of solitary atonement. He was a man who believed his capacity for great love had been buried alongside his child, and any future happiness was a betrayal of that memory. He moved through his days with a kind of detached professionalism, his smiles rare and never quite reaching the profound sadness in his eyes. Romance was a distant country, one he had no visa to visit and no desire to explore. Their paths, though existing in the same small, drama-charged town of Port Charles, ran on seemingly parallel tracks, destined never to converge. Elizabeth, an artist, moved in circles of passionate, often destructive relationships and high-stakes family drama. Finn, a man of science, was entrenched in the world of medical mysteries and his own internal psychological battles. They were satellites in different orbits, one circling a sun of emotional chaos, the other a black hole of regret. The catalyst for the impossible was, as it so often is in Port Charles, a crisis. A massive multi-car accident on the Freeway 1 rain-slicked evening flooded the emergency room with casualties, stretching the hospital's resources to their absolute limit. Elizabeth, volunteering with the hospital's art therapy program, had stayed late to help organize supplies for the influx of traumatized patients. Finn, of course, was on the front lines, his white coat a blur of focused intensity as he triaged the wounded. It was in the chaotic epicenter of the ER that their worlds first collided, not with a gentle nudge, but with the violent force of circumstance. Elizabeth, carrying a tray of sterile dressings, rounded a corner just as Finn, rushing to a coding patient, barreled through the double doors. The collision was abrupt and jarring. The tray clattered to the floor, scattering bandages and gauze across the linoleum. Elizabeth stumbled and Finn's hand shot out instinctively to steady her, his grip firm on her upper arms. For a single suspended moment, the chaos of the ER faded into a dull, distant roar. The frantic beeping of monitors, the shouted orders, the cries of the injured, it all melted into a muffled hum. Elizabeth looked up, her wide, expressive blue eyes meeting his, and Finn found himself unable to look away. He saw not the startled annoyance he expected, but a depth of empathy and a flicker of a shared, unspoken understanding of the pain surrounding them. In her gaze he didn't see pity or fear, but a quiet strength. "I'm so sorry," Finn said, his voice rough with adrenaline, yet softer than he intended. His hands were still on her arms, and he became acutely aware of their warmth through the sleeve of her shirt. It's okay," Elizabeth breathed, her own voice barely a whisper. A strange sensation like a static charge passed between them. It was fleeting, irrational, and utterly undeniable. "You're needed. Don't worry about this." He released her, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, gave a curt, almost confused nod, and then was gone, swallowed back into the storm of the emergency room. Elizabeth stood frozen for a moment, her skin tingling where his hands had been, the image of his tormented, yet strikingly handsome, face burned into her mind. She shook her head, attributing the strange flutter in her chest to the shock of the collision and the high-stress environment. She was a practical woman. She did not believe in moments of cosmic significance, especially not in the middle of a trauma bay. Finn, for his part, tried to dismiss the encounter as he worked to save a life. He was a scientist, a man who dealt in empirical data and clinical facts. The brief, electric connection he felt was, he reasoned, a simple neurological response to a sudden physical interaction combined with extreme stress. He filed it away, focusing on the rhythm of chest compressions and the dosage of epinephrine. Yet, throughout the long, grueling night, the image of the woman with the compassionate eyes and the quiet dignity would surface in his mind at unexpected moments, a still point in the turning world of chaos. The following days should have returned them to their separate orbits. But the universe, or perhaps the peculiar gravitational pull of Port Charles, had other plans. A mutual friend, recognizing the lonely shadows in both their lives, orchestrated a casual, completely unthreatening coffee meeting. It was framed as two busy professionals taking a brief, well-deserved break. Both Elizabeth and Finn arrived with low expectations and a healthy degree of skepticism. They met at a small independent cafe called Kelly's, a Port Charles institution that had witnessed countless beginnings and endings. The air was rich with the aroma of freshly ground coffee and baked goods. The initial conversation was stilted, polite. They discussed their work, the weather, the never-ending saga of the Cassadine family. A safe, town-wide topic. But then something shifted. Finn, usually so guarded, found himself mentioning his daughter, Anna. It wasn't a detailed confession, just a simple, "I have a daughter. She passed away." The words were heavy, laden with a grief that was still fresh and raw. Instead of the awkward condolences or prying questions he had grown to expect, Elizabeth simply listened. Her eyes held his, offering a silent acknowledgement of his pain. She didn't try to fix it or explain it away. She just let it sit there between them, a shared sacred space of loss. And then she shared a fragment of her own story, the loss of her first love, Lucky Spencer, not to death, but to the slow, painful erosion of trust and circumstance. She spoke of the constant struggle to protect her sons in a town that seemed to breed danger. It was in this exchange of vulnerabilities that the foundation was laid. They were no longer just a nurse and a doctor, an artist and a scientist. They were two survivors, two people who had been carved hollow by loss and were slowly, tentatively, trying to fill the spaces with something resembling peace. Finn was captivated by Elizabeth's resilience, the way her spirit, though scarred, remained fundamentally unbroken. Elizabeth was drawn to Finn's raw honesty. He didn't present a polished, perfect version of himself. He was a man weighed down by his mistakes, yet determined to be better. In a town filled with liars and schemers, his brutal truthfulness was a rare and powerful aphrodisiac. Their coffee meetings became a weekly ritual. Then they evolved into walks along the Port Charles waterfront, the gentle lapping of the harbor waves providing a soothing soundtrack to their deepening conversations. They talked about art and medicine, about their fears for the future and their regrets from the past. Finn found himself laughing, a genuine, unforced sound that startled him with its unfamiliarity. Elizabeth discovered that the careful walls around her heart didn't feel as necessary in his presence. With Finn, she didn't have to be the strong one, the caretaker, the victim of fate. She could just be Elizabeth. The fans of General Hospital watched this slow, quiet burn with a growing sense of bewildered anticipation. This was not a typical Port Charles romance. There were no evil twins, no memory-wiping drugs, no corporate takeovers masquerading as courtship. There were no grand, dramatic declarations set to a swelling orchestra. This was something entirely different, something the audience had not been conditioned to expect. It was a romance built not on passion-fueled obsession, but on the quiet, sturdy pillars of mutual respect, understanding, and shared solace. Online forums and social media platforms began to buzz with a new kind of energy. The couple, quickly dubbed Frizz by the fandom, was an anomaly. Threads titled, "Is anyone else actually loving Finn and Elizabeth?" And the slow burn we didn't know we needed began to proliferate. Viewers were captivated by the sheer normality of it all. Their scenes were a balm amidst the high-octane drama unfolding elsewhere in the canvas. A pivotal moment, one that would be etched into the memories of fans, occurred on one of their evening walks. A sudden violent summer storm rolled in from the harbor, catching them completely by surprise. The sky, which had been a soft twilight purple, turned an angry bruised gray. The wind whipped through the trees and heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly escalating into a torrential downpour. They ran, laughing breathlessly, for the nearest shelter, the covered bandstand in the park. They stood there side by side, watching the rain sheet down, creating a shimmering curtain that isolated them from the rest of the world. They were both soaked to the skin, their hair plastered to their heads, water dripping from their noses and chins. Elizabeth shivered slightly in her damp clothes. Without a word, Finn shrugged off his own soaked jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple, instinctive, and profoundly intimate. "This is crazy," Elizabeth said, her teeth chattering slightly, but a wide, unreserved smile on her face. Finn looked at her, her mascara smudged, her cheeks flushed from the run and the cold, and he thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, the fortifications he had spent years maintaining, crumbled in that instant. They didn't just crack, they dissolved into dust. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low and serious, cutting through the drumming of the rain. The use of her full name made her look up, her smile softening into an expression of curious intensity. "Yes, Finn." He reached out, his hand cupping her wet cheek, his thumb gently stroking away a drop of water. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the sound of their breathing and the rain on the roof. I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the humid air, simple, direct, and utterly devastating in their sincerity. There was no grand orchestration, no perfect sunset, just two drenched people in a gazebo. And it was perfect. Elizabeth's breath hitched. She saw the truth in his eyes, the vulnerability, the fear, and the hope. She placed her hand over his, leaning into his touch. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered back. It was not love at first sight in the traditional fairy tale sense. It was not the instant explosive recognition that the spoiler had so tantalizingly promised. But in that moment, under the percussive rhythm of the summer storm, it became clear that their first collision in the ER had been a seed, planted in the fertile ground of shared pain. The coffee dates, the waterfront walks, the quiet conversations, they were the sunlight and water that had nurtured it. And this confession, this simple, heartfelt admission in the midst of a downpour, was its breathtaking, unexpected bloom. It was a love that had snuck up on them, and on the audience, a quiet revolution in a world of loud explosions. The aftermath of that confession was a new, delicate dance. They were two people who were experts in heartbreak, now tentatively holding a fragile, beautiful new possibility in their hands. They were cautious, terrified of breaking what they had just built. Their first kiss did not come that night in the rain. It came days later, in the soft glow of the lamp in Elizabeth's living room, after she had confessed a deep-seated fear about one of her sons. Finn had listened, had offered not a solution, but his unwavering support. He had taken her hand, and when she looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, he had leaned in and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of reverence and a fierce, growing protectiveness. It was a kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. Of course, this being Port Charles, their burgeoning happiness could not exist in a vacuum. External forces began to gather, threatening the delicate peace they had found. Finn's past, in the form of his ex-wife, who was deeply entangled in her own web of deception and manipulation, began to cast a long shadow. She saw Finn's newfound happiness as a threat to her own agendas and set about trying to sabotage it with calculated precision, sowing seeds of doubt about Finn's stability and his capacity to be a reliable partner. Simultaneously, Elizabeth's complex past with the men in her life, particularly the volatile and unpredictable Franco, created its own set of complications. Old wounds were reopened, and past loyalties were tested. Friends and family, with their own biases and histories, offered unsolicited advice, warning Elizabeth that Finn was too damaged, too complicated, and warning Finn that Elizabeth's life was a vortex of drama that would only pull him back into chaos. They were faced with a choice: retreat back into the safety of their solitary fortresses, or stand together and fight for the unexpected, miraculous connection they had found. The audience watched, their investment in Frizz deepening with every obstacle. This was no longer just a pleasant subplot. It had become the emotional core of the show for many. Fans took to social media to defend the couple, to analyze every glance and touch, and to plead with the writers not to tear them apart. They had been won over not by spectacle, but by substance. The true test came during a medical crisis involving one of Elizabeth's sons. It was a parent's worst nightmare, a scenario designed to expose every fracture and weakness in a relationship. In the high-stakes environment of the hospital, with Elizabeth gripped by sheer terror, Finn was a rock. He was not just her boyfriend. He was Dr. Finn, a brilliant advocate, using his knowledge and his position to ensure her son received the best possible care. He was calm, authoritative, and deeply compassionate. He never left her side, his presence a constant, steadying force in the storm of her fear. In that crisis, every doubt was silenced. Elizabeth saw not a damaged man burdened by his past, but a strong, capable partner she could rely on in the darkest of times. Finn saw not a woman whose life was too complicated, but a fierce mother whose love for her children was the very essence of her being. A love he understood and respected on a profound level. When the crisis passed and her son was out of danger, Elizabeth found Finn in an empty hospital corridor, slumped against a wall, the adrenaline finally draining from him, revealing the depth of his own fear and empathy. She walked over to him and without a word, she took his face in her hands and kissed him, a kiss filled with gratitude, love, and a promise of a shared future. "You saved him," she whispered against his lips. "We saved him," he corrected, pulling her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. In that embrace they were no longer just Elizabeth and Finn. They were a unit, a team. They had faced the fire together and emerged stronger, their bond tempered in the crucible of fear and hope. The journey of Elizabeth Weber and Hamilton Finn is a testament to the idea that the most profound love stories are not always the ones that begin with a thunderclap. Sometimes the most enduring and unexpected loves are the ones that grow quietly in the spaces between words, in the shared understanding of pain, in the simple steady offering of a hand to hold. It is a love that fans could not have expected, a slow gentle flame that proved itself capable of weathering any storm. It is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest romantic spoiler is not a shocking reveal or a dramatic twist, but the quiet, revolutionary promise of two broken people finding a way to become whole together. Their story continues to unfold, not as a perfect fairy tale, but as a real, messy, and beautifully human connection, proving that in a world of constant chaos, the most powerful force of all is a love that is built to last, one quiet, unexpected moment at a time. It redefined what a soap opera romance could be, prioritizing emotional authenticity over melodramatic contrivance, and in doing so, captured the hearts of an audience who saw in Frizz a reflection of their own hopes for a love that is deep, understanding, and resilient. It is a love that was not found in a first glance, but built with every shared coffee, every walk in the park, every vulnerable confession, and every storm weathered side by side. It is, in every sense, the love story that Port Charles and its fans truly needed.